Welcome to the Menzies. So today, before going to the lecture, I'm going to talk to you about some things. So first, I'm going to apologize for not uploading a video for many days, and the reason was I was busy in college and my exams. So now I have decided I'm actually going to upload a video once a week or after 3 days interval. And last thing would be, I would like for you to actually write down some topics in the comment section so that I can make videos on them as well. So without further ado, I'm actually going to start talking about atherosclerosis. So here I have written some objectives for you guys. The first one being the recap, causes, pathogenesis, and all and all. So as my board is small, I'm going to write the initials of these objectives on the side of the board, like R, C, B, C, F, and R. I apologize for my writing as well. So recapping what atherosclerosis is. So atherosclerosis is a process in which there are atheromas inside the wall of a vessel, specifically in the tunica intima. And these atheromas compose of fibrofatty masses. Okay? And if you go back further, atherosclerosis was actually part of a bigger parent, which was arteriosclerosis, which was divided into Markberg medial sclerosis and arteriolosclerosis, which I write as artes, then fibromuscular intimal hyperplasia, and the most lethal one, atherosclerosis. So all of these were less lethal, but atherosclerosis was majorly very lethal and fatal. So one thing which I want to clear for you guys is atherosclerosis is actually not an acute disease. It is a chronic, gradual, slow process. It starts from the birth of a person and continues till his death. So atherosclerosis is fibrofatty masses inside tunica intima, and these fibrofatty masses are actually called as atheromas, which are composed of a lipid core. And this lipid core in consistency is soft and friable, which is also called as groovus. This lipid core is composed of cholesterol, which I write as CHL, and cholesterol esters. Okay, and also there is another thing which I'm going to explain to you later in the video, that is necrotic area, and how this necrotic area is formed and what it is actually is going to be explained later in the video. So this is the recap. Now going to the causes of the atherosclerosis. So there is a person, actually a group of people, and their name was Framingham's heart study. Okay, Framingham's heart study, and they told us about two things which might be responsible for atherosclerosis. One was constitutional factors, a group of things actually, and they divided the group of things into two parts: constitutional and modifiable, which I wrote as mode. So constitutionals are also called as non-modifiable factors. So these are the factors which we cannot correct, but this we can correct, and it's in our domain. So moving on to what are the constitutional factors and what are the modifiable factors. So in constitutional factors we have genetic factors or abnormalities, we have family history, like some diseases which run in family, majorly hypertension, diabetes, asthma. Then we have male gender. Yes, so this disease attacks males more, and old age. So these are the constitutional factors. We cannot do anything about them. But the thing is there are some factors which we can do something about. There is hypertension, which is major, 60% of the cause of atherosclerosis. Then there is diabetes mellitus and smoking. And the most important, there is hyper or dyslipidemia. And in these, the number one, more than 40% is hypercholesterolemia. So I'm not going to write it further. Hypercholesterolemia, and to make it more specific, this is familial hypercholesterolemia. Cholesterolemia. Okay, don't mind my pronunciations. So I am actually going to go into the depth of these causes. So in genetic abnormalities, we can go back to Mendel's laws and multifactorial traits. So according to Mendel's trait, this can happen in familial hypercholesterolemia. Okay, this can cause atherosclerosis. The other thing would be multifactorial traits. So multifactorial traits, there comes hypertension, which can occur due to multifactorial traits, and diabetes mellitus. Hypertension. So I'm going to tell you two things here, which I'm not going to tell you further in modifiable causes. Is hypertension can be genetic. There are some theories, some scientists which say that hypertension can travel in families and is responsible for atherosclerosis, and the causes for it is genetic changes. For example, there are polymorphisms in ACE receptors, which is angiotensin converting receptors, or angiotensinogen receptors, which I can write as AGN. So there are polymorphisms in these receptors which cause hypertension. Okay. Also, there is another mutation which causes a syndrome called Liddle syndrome, and in this syndrome there is excessive retention of sodium, and you know, wherever sodium goes, water goes as well. So when sodium goes inside the body, water goes in as well. So there is sodium and water retention. Subsequently, it causes hypertension. This Liddle syndrome is caused by a mutation in epithelial sodium channel receptor, and there's a gene which actually causes its degradation, and that gene is abnormal, and that is why there is excessive retention of sodium through these channels. Then comes the family history. So there might be a history of parents. The most important history is actually the parents. If the parents have hypertension, there is like a lot of chance that hypertension is going to be traveled back to the children. Then there is male gender. So according to a research, males have more tendency to get atherosclerosis and heart diseases than females, but there is some specificity about it. The females are protected. The protected females are those who are actually undergoing their menstrual cycle. So the post-menopausal women are actually not protected. They have more incidence of developing atherosclerosis, hypertension, vascular diseases than males. So I can write PM, and this symbol is for female greater than male. Some scientists thought that estrogen was actually protecting the females from the vascular diseases. So they gave estrogen to females in the form of contraceptive pills or in the form of hormone replacement therapy, and found out that instead of decreasing the vascular diseases or accidents, it actually increased them. So this theory was rejected. So we don't know why, but after the post-menopause, the incidence of atherosclerosis increases. And in males, it is more than the menstruating females. So this is that, the gender. Then comes the age. So in 40 to 60 years, there is 10 times more chance of developing atherosclerosis and vascular disease. And also there is another peculiar thing that with every decade of life, there is an increase in the risk of developing atherosclerosis. So there goes the constitutional factors, and you can actually understand how we can not do anything about them. Now comes the good part, the more interesting part, which I'm going to write with blue, and that part is hypertension, diabetes mellitus. There is smoking and dyslipidemia. So the most important one is dyslipidemia. But I'm going to discuss it at the end of the video because this one is the most expensive. So I'm going to discuss this, and this first. So let's go to smoking first. So if a person smokes 1 pack of cigarettes per day, that means 20 cigarettes, he has 2 times more risk of developing atherosclerosis and vascular disease than a normal person who is not smoking. Also, there is a chance of another process going to happen, that is Buerger's phenomena, in which there is a disease of the vessels called thrombosis obliterans, in which the vessels get occluded over time, because smoking not only causes increase in vascular disease, but the process is actually, it increases adhesiveness of platelets, which I'm going to write as plates. So that is about smoking. Moving on to hypertension. So I just erased smoking. Hypertension actually causes hemodynamic stress on the vessel wall. That hemodynamic stress causes endothelial dysfunction, which I wrote as ET, and this endothelial dysfunction leads to increased adhesiveness of platelets, increased permeability of the vessel, and the third thing would be activation of the endothelium that might lead to inflammation plus coagulation. So hypertension does that, causes the hemodynamic stress, endothelial cells get activated, they release their cytokines and growth factors. The cytokines activate the inflammation process, the growth factors activate the healing process, and some other factors also activate the coagulation pathway. So that is a very huge problem, and this actually damages muscular arteries more. And what do you mean by muscular arteries? These are the coronary arteries and other arteries as well. So that is hypertension. So if we can recap, hypertension, the essential hypertension caused hyaline arteriolosclerosis, and the malignant hypertension caused hyperplastic arteriolosclerosis. Diabetes mellitus, how does it cause atherosclerosis? The magical process. So it does it 2 ways. Number 1 would be hypercholesterolemia, and number 2 would be diabetes mellitus. There is increased sugar, in the blood, the hyperglycemia. This sugar glycosylates the protein, and these proteins irritate the vessel wall, actually the endothelium, and the endothelium gets dysfunctional, and again the process gets repeated. Increased adhesiveness of platelets, increased permeability, and release of growth factors, cytokines, etc., which cause inflammation, coagulation, and healing. So that is how diabetes mellitus caused that. Going back to the last one, which is dyslipidemia. So dyslipidemia, I told you the number 1 cause of atherosclerosis in the category of dyslipidemia is hypercholesterolemia. So what hypercholesterolemia does? So there is familial hypercholesterolemia. In this disease, which is inherited, there is absence of LDL receptors, which I wrote as LDL and R in a circle. That means LDL receptors. These are absent in the liver, and the liver thinks, there is no cholesterol, there is no LDL, and it starts to produce huge amount of cholesterol and LDL. Okay, huge amounts, and these amounts get further accumulated into the plasma, but liver can not sense them again, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And people actually suffer a lot from this. Then comes a simple term called hyperlipidemia. Hyperlipidemia means increased lipids. So what increased lipids do? They irritate or damage endothelium, and endothelium becomes more sticky and more permeable as a result. And the lipids, which are LDL, which is cholesterol esters, but majorly cholesterol and LDL, these get inside the vessel lumen. Okay, so here is LDL and here is cholesterol, and both have different functions. So the cholesterol, it becomes crystallized sometimes by the macrophages, but the major role, which is going to intrigue you people more, is LDL. So what LDL does? LDL and cholesterol both actually, they make macrophages release their reactive oxygen species. These reactive oxygen species, when released, go to the endothelium and damage the endothelium cells, and then they cannot produce nitric oxide. And you both know, we all of us know, nitric oxide is a vasodilator. So when nitric oxide is neutralized by the reactive oxygen species due to the overproduction and entry of cholesterol and LDL into the lumen of the vessel, there is no vasoconstriction, there is no vasodilation, and this causes narrowing and hypertension and atherosclerosis. Another pathway would be to become oxidized LDL. This happens in the same way. Reactive oxygen species act on the LDL secreted from the macrophages, and this becomes oxidized LDL. And let me tell you, this is actually an order for the cells, and cells go there and just die. Okay, so oxidized LDL causes formation of foam cells. Foam cells, specialized cells, which actually are macrophages or smooth muscle cells, which I wrote as SMC, and macrophages, which I'm going to write as macro. Foam cells are actually these two, but there is one interesting thing. If this is a macrophage here, in order to become a foam cell, it would have to ingest large amounts of cholesterol, large amount of lipids, large amount of LDL. So when it does that, it becomes huge. And as you can see, this is the macrophage here, and this is the smooth muscle cell here, which has become huge because of the oxidized LDL. So it forms foam cells. Second thing which it does, it superactivates macrophages and smooth muscle cells to eat lots and lots of lipid and cholesterol and become more fat. So, and you know, after a while, if a person becomes obese, he becomes obese and more obese and more obese, and eventually gets an MI or a stroke. So in the same way, they get an MI and they burst. And when they burst, this happens. All of the contents are released and accumulate in the tunica intima, and this is the necrotic area which I talked about. So these are foam cells. The second thing, superactivation. Now the third thing would be the killing. They are cytotoxic to the smooth muscle cell, to the endothelial cells and the macrophages. So this is oxidized LDL. So now I'm going to make another video, because this has actually become a long one, and I'm going to explain in that video the pathogenesis and rest of stuff about atherosclerosis. So, recapping this, there are two factors, two processes, or two factors, group of factors actually, responsible for atherosclerosis. One hand would be the modifiable factors, and the other hand would be the non-modifiable factors. So on the non-modifiable factors, you cannot modify them, and it includes genetic factors, family history, age, and male gender. And on the other hand, there would be majorly four. There are a lot of them, but majorly four. There is hypertension, diabetes mellitus, there is smoking, there is hyperlipidemia. There are also some other factors. There can be inflammation, there can be hyperhomocystinemia, there can be metabolic syndrome, there can be increased level of lipoprotein A, there can be like a person who is stressed, a type A personality person who is competent, who is working a lot, exercising less, stressed more, that person as well. In people who are not that active, they do not do exercise, they are also exposed to atherosclerosis. Also, there might be, I will have to get an aid from my notes, and that would be procoagulants. In increased procoagulants like thrombin, thrombin through protease activated receptors activates the inflammatory pathway. Okay, because these receptors are present on leukocytes and they activate them. WBCs, leukocytes, neutrophils, and causes inflammation, and inflammation cannot do that again, because in inflammation there is increased permeability, there is increased release of growth factors, the healing is going on as well, there is fibrosis as well, that leads to atherosclerosis too. And then there would be, so one thing which I'm going to tell you about is, in order to understand atherosclerosis, it is a slow gradual process, and there is formation of lipid structures, lipid masses underneath the endothelium, like this. So if this is the endothelium, this is the lipid, and it's going to push it up, and when it was pushed up, it's going to get stenosed, narrowed. So that is about the causes of atherosclerosis. If you like this video, give this video a thumbs up and follow us, share this video with your friends, and if you want to add some suggestions or comments, you can subscribe to our channel. Allah Hafiz.